Welcome to the Indiana Basketball Weekly Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. The Indiana Basketball Weekly Show is brought to you by BetNow.eu. You can use a promo code TRUTH100 to get a cashback bonus on your first deposit. I am your co-host for the Indiana Basketball Weekly Show, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I'd like to welcome in Kent Sterling. How you doing, Kent?
I am great. It's always great on a game day, Mike.
Yes, it is, and it's actually a game day where they'll play a team that can actually give them some competition, and maybe we can find something out.
Well, we can only hope, right? Louisiana Tech, at least they're in the top 100 in Ken Palm, whatever that means. They played Creighton close. They had a common opponent in North Alabama. I think they won that game by 21. Indiana won by 26. So hopefully this is a little more competitive, and the guys are playing the last 5 minutes for something, rather than figuring out, which of the walk-ons are going to kind of get those wrap-up minutes, and so the team feels good about itself.
Well, I can tell you this, though. If they end up getting minutes for the walk-ons, I think that's a very good sign for the future, because I really do think this Louisiana Tech team is pretty decent.
Well, the one thing that they can do is they can defend the basketball. They lead the country in steal percentage, but the one thing they can't do is shoot. They're a terrible three-point shooting team, and they don't hit a lot of shots from the foul line. So hopefully Indiana gets a little bit hot. Hopefully what we see, though, we're all looking for growth, right? I mean, that's what you want out of these 7 games against lesser opponents. And despite the fact that they look like they can play a little bit, they better be a lesser opponent. If we see a third straight game with Devontae Green playing really good team-first basketball, I'm going to start to get a little bit excited about these Hoosiers.
Yeah, and when I looked at Louisiana Tech this morning, the one that stood out to me was Mubarak Muhammad. He's a junior college transfer who's 6'7". He's a huge threat on the boards, though, and against Creighton, and that was at Creighton, one of the toughest places to play in the country. He had a 16-rebound game, and when you look at common opponents, Louisiana Tech beat North Alabama 82-61, very similar to the way Indiana beat Northern Alabama, who they beat 91-65. So I think this is probably the first team, definitely the first team they've played that actually has a man inside that they're going to have to guard and they're going to have to battle for rebounds.
Anything that gives us a little bit of hope that the game could be competitive, and not because Indiana didn't show up or because they fell asleep in the first half, like happened again against Princeton. I mean, they didn't really get it rolling against Princeton until a little bit later. I'm looking forward to any kind of change of pace at this point. It reminds me a little bit of the NFL season where you've got 4 preseason games and you look forward to them and you think, man, it's game day, let's go. And then you realize that they're meaningless and they're silly and they're just cash grabs. And that's kind of the way I'm starting to feel about Indiana in this non-conference part of the schedule, this November part of the schedule, where if you don't go 7-0, you feel like you really crap the bed.
Yeah, and with Louisiana Tech, the other thing that stands out to me is their guards are much bigger than most of the other opponents that IU has played. And I think that could benefit the Bulldogs in the half court. They've got a team assist ratio or assist to turnover ratio of 1.6. That could be something to keep an eye on, with at least 4 players averaging 2.5 assists per game. And so far this season, they've used 10 players in a rotation that average over 10 minutes a player. So you also, from the film I watched the game against Creighton, you get multiple different rotations throughout the game. They shoot just 29.6% from 3. That hasn't stopped them from shooting, though, because they average like 25 threes a game. So my worry here is if they shoot them that many times, those guys think they may make them, and this could be the night where they go in, and if they do, then you got your hands full.
Well, and that's what you don't want to have happen. You don't want this thing to become kind of, you don't show up for the first 10 minutes, and so they hang around, but then they're good enough to hang around for another 10, 15, 20 minutes, and all of a sudden you're in a dogfight. And when you get into those dogfights and you're in the last 5 minutes and a lesser team is hanging around, like you said about shooting, teams all of a sudden, they sort of grow this belief that they belong. And if that happens with Indiana, an opponent of Indiana, this whole thing could unravel. And a win isn't going to really do you anything. It's going to do you no good, but it's the absence of the loss that's important. If you pick up a loss here, that hurts your resume, and it's the kind of hurt that's going to sting a little bit moving forward as we get closer to March and we start to think, okay, is this the year that Indiana goes back to the NCAAs?
But the thing about watching this team against Creighton, at Creighton, that I took away from it is this is a team that should challenge Indiana, but Indiana should win the game. And they may only win it by 8 to 10 points, but I think that is something that they need right now. They need a team that can challenge them at least somewhat.
Be careful what you wish for, Mike.
Well, that's what I'm going to wish for, because I would rather have it come now against Louisiana Tech than come when the Big Ten season starts.
Yeah, we don't need Nebraska hanging on.
No.
We don't need that for sure. Really what you want to do is in this non-conference portion of the schedule, including the games against Nebraska and Wisconsin, more than one loss you really don't want. You've got Florida State, you've got Arkansas, you've got Notre Dame, but what you'd really like to get to is a point where your guys start to believe in themselves rather than being on the floor with people and being the reason that somebody else believes in themselves. You want to be the team that builds momentum and starts to fill roles and feel good about those roles.
Yeah, and I think Louisiana Tech, from watching them, would fall somewhere between 8 and 11 in the Big Ten. I really liked them when I watched them.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, this is a team that 4 of their 5 starters average between like 10.4 and 11.2 points a game. So they're not selfish. They can hit the boards. So I really think this is going to be a test tonight for Indiana. And when we look back at the Princeton game, I don't think the same can be said about the Princeton game. But and the thing that scared me there is, 35-31 at the half. And
yeah.
It was like Princeton kind of lulled Indiana to sleep. It made Indiana play at pace they wanted to play.
Yeah, Indiana is going to have to start forcing the issue. And is going to have to come out. Like I remember back in the day when Indiana came out of the tunnel, like there was some kind of, it just felt like the opponent was a little bit odd at Assembly Hall. Like, holy crap, we got to play against these guys. There was a military feeling to the way Indiana kind of came out of the locker room and came out of the tunnel. And they established what they were going to do right out of the gate. And they need to get back to where that is it's not the exception anymore. It's what we come to expect. And that to me is that next step. And I don't know if guys have that kind of mentality anymore, where they're in the locker room and they're like, okay, let's just end their life. Let's put our foot on their throat, step down, and end this thing in the first 10 minutes and make them believe they can't hang with us and that we're going to kick the hell out of them. I just don't get that feeling from Indiana, but I don't get that feeling from a lot of teams. There's not that kind of like, ooh, look at these guys. I don't see a lot of teams like that today in college basketball like we did back in the day.
Yeah. Well, you don't see a lot of teams acting like that in any sport anymore.
No, isn't that something? I don't know why. That was the most fun thing for me in competing. Was like, okay, you get off to a good start. You just ignore them during warm-ups. Let them look at us, and then we're going to kick the living hell out of them and set a tone early that makes it so they don't even want to compete against us. And people are very, very nice, very genteel in the way they compete these days.
Yeah, and when you look at Indiana, they were genteel in that first half. They got stagnant early. They tended to stand around rather than making cuts. They didn't execute very much screening action. The ball was not moved well. But the second half, completely different story.
Yeah.
I think they pushed the pace of the game much better. And maybe it's just the fact that Princeton was the first team that actually could do something to give them problems. But the worry here is this is the same thing we've been seeing, where you're not playing 40 minutes no matter what the reason is.
Well, and I wonder if Devontae Green not starting has something to do with that too. I think that starting Devontae Green in place of Armand Franklin, having Finney, Green, Smith, and then Trace and Joey, that seems like a lineup you're going to settle on eventually. And you feel good about Durham coming in off the bench. You feel better about Franklin. Jerome Hunter, certainly. But I think you've got to get to the point where your best 5 players are out on the floor. And I don't think we've been able to do that because Devontae's coming off the bench.
All right. Devontae played well though, and
Yeah.
Joey Brunk, I think, did a really good job underneath defensively in this game. Princeton had a guy coming in averaging 17 points a game, finished with just 4 points. I think Brunk was really impressive on defense.
He is. He's playing better and better on the defensive end, and then on the offensive end, there have been a few guys in Indiana history where I've thought this of them, and that's that Joey plays when he gets down on the block. He isn't 6'10" or 6'11" anymore. He shrinks down to about 6'7", and
Yeah.
I don't know why. But he doesn't play to his height offensively down on the block. Defensively, he's really been pretty good, especially against a team like Princeton.
Yeah, and only 9 turnovers again. So when
Yeah.
you look at this, I mean, the free throw shooting, this is still, it has a little bit of a different feel for me than it has before. I mean, Indiana shot 82.4% free throw, 56.4% from the field. When you look at that and you look at the 9 turnovers, those are three things that are paramount to be a successful basketball team in any league.
They've done a really good job of limiting mistakes, and the turnover issue is kind of where I start to feel a little bit goofy about Joey on the offensive end, in that he turned the ball over 4 times, and you cannot turn the ball over 4 times playing down on the pivot. That's unacceptable. If you have a guard who gives it up 4 times, you're not happy about it. But if you got a guy down on the block who's given it up 4 times or fumbling it out of bounds 4 times, you've got a problem. And this team has been one that's kind of limited mistakes and has run what it's run effectively, if not with great passion. And we know this from anybody who's been around since Bob Knight coached. What is it? It's about mistake aversion, right? Your odds of winning are directly proportionate to your ability to limit mistakes. And this has been a team that's done a good job limiting mistakes. And I think it's going to be interesting tonight to see how Louisiana Tech forces turnovers of Indiana, because that's what they do. Like I said, they lead the country in steal percentage. And so let's see what happens when people kind of ratchet up the pressure and put pressure on the ball and try to force you into making a pass at a time when maybe you don't want to make it, and how you adjust to that kind of thing.
All right. When we look at this, Trace Jackson Davis and Justin Smith, the thing to me is how efficient they are. I mean, they're shooting the ball well, and inside in the low post, this team is much better than what they have been the past couple of years.
And Trace Jackson Davis should be a guy that Louisiana Tech has tremendous problems matching up with Justin as well. Those guys both possess athleticism and basketball intellect that should be leaps and bounds ahead of whatever Louisiana Tech's got. There are reasons that kids go to Louisiana Tech, and there are reasons kids go to Indiana. Indiana, in the recruiting of every person on the floor, Indiana should have rejected every kid playing for Louisiana Tech, and Louisiana Tech never should have had a chance to get any of the Indiana kids. And that starts to me with Justin Smith and Trace Jackson Davis, because they've got next level abilities, both from an athletic and intellectual standpoint. And so they should be the guys who can really take it to Louisiana Tech and pose matchup problems. And, you just kind of hope that at some point that switch flips for Justin Smith. I hear from people down in Bloomington that it has, and we just maybe haven't seen it. They're really, really pleased with Devontae Green's development. They are equally pleased internally with Justin Smith's development from a behavioral aspect in playing basketball. He's always been a freak athlete, but from a basketball acumen and willingness to compete perspective, the people at Indiana really like where Justin Smith's head's at.
Yeah, and another one that stood out to me, even though he only put up 5 points on the stat sheet, I think Race Thompson got 23 minutes, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, turned the ball over once, only 1 foul. So I think it's a solid 23 minutes for a guy coming off the bench.
And he's one of those guys where I think that's also going to become the expectation, where he can come off the bench, be kind of a Swiss Army knife guy who can play multiple spots, defend multiple spots. You're going to be able to switch almost everybody when Trace Jackson or when Race is a part of kind of a pick and roll action. and you feel really good about him, and you hope that he can stay healthy. You hope Finney stays healthy. These guys who have been limited over their first year as active players for Indiana. Trace, of course, came and redshirted that freshman year when he reclassed. But if those guys can give you what they should give you and be consistent about it, then you can kind of win games with Devontae, with Justin, and with Trace, and with the other guys. They're going to help you win matchups and allow those other three guys to kind of dominate a little bit. At least that's the hope.
All right, so when you look at the game tonight for Louisiana Tech, what do you want to see?
I want to see consistent effort again. If I were a coach at Indiana, I would never show them what they did well. I would only show them where they had lapses in concentration and kind of lost track of the game for a possession or two, because that's where you're gonna have to clean that stuff up, because you're not going to beat Michigan State or Ohio State with talent. You're going to have to out execute, and you're going to have to limit mistakes. And you're going to have, and that's a possession by possession thing. I remember seeing Butler play Villanova 2 years ago at Hinkle, and that game was withering. Both teams executed at such a high level against one another, possession to possession to possession. It was awesome. Indiana is going to have to get to a place where they execute in that way. They can't go away for 2, 3, 4 minutes, because those 2, 3, or 4 minutes are going to be what costs them wins. And those wins, if they stack high enough, that team isn't going to get to where it ought to get.
All right, so when I say Louisiana Tech, what do you think of basketball-wise?
Karl Malone, right?
Me too.
Yeah.
Was it 1985 they made it to the Sweet 16 and lost to Oklahoma in like double overtime?
I think so. And yeah, that's all I know about that. And I know that the women's program historically was just awesome.
Yeah, because I remember 1982. What was the girl's name with the little ponytail? She was like a short blonde guard. I can't remember her name though.
Beverly D'Angelo. She went on to become an actress.
I don't think it was. You think it was? Because that's about the time she was in Vacation, too. Well, it was her in Vacation, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
I thought it was. Yeah. But, no. I just remember the 84-85 team of Karl Malone, because that team was really good, too.
Well, he was built like nobody else, maybe in college basketball at the time. He had, he and Dwight Howard kind of similar builds. Karl Malone not as tall, but man, shoulders just like they shoulders like 16-pound bowling balls, right? They were just unbelievable.
Malarkey. Her name was Kim Malarkey or something?
Mulkey,
yeah, because that's the one that
coaches
somewhere now. I don't really follow women's college basketball, but back then I used to watch everything, and I think that like in 1982 I watched them beat like a young Cheryl Miller in USC in a national championship game.
And back then, as today, that's just terrific basketball. I love watching women's basketball. They have to execute. They have to shoot well. Because if they don't, they just aren't athletic enough to create shots. And so they have to play good tactical basketball. I love women's basketball.
Yeah, I think the only problem with women's basketball is college-wise, it's kind of like the NCAA was in the 50s and 60s, where the talent's not real deep. So you don't get a whole lot of upsets in the tournament. I know there's been a few more here or there over the last few years as the competition does expand and get better, and you don't just have a Tennessee or an Old Dominion or a Louisiana Tech. I mean, because every year it seems like you can just pick the top seeds, and you're going to get probably all four, if not three of the four in the Final Four. So I agree the quality of basketball is good with those best programs. I think 20, 30 years from now, you're going to see something more akin to what we saw NCAA-wise in the 80s and 90s, where it's a little bit more wide open.
Yeah, I agree. And they're getting bigger. Back in the day, you didn't really, for whatever reason, I don't know why this has happened, but there weren't a lot of Brittany Griners that are just, physically imposing in women's basketball. You didn't have a lot of that. You had a lot of clever kind of basketball and people who just sort of knew how to play and couldn't dominate you physically. And now you're evolving into a sport where you do have those occasional unicorns with a skill set and a physicality that just doesn't exist anywhere else.
But all right, Kent, you got anything else before we wrap it up today? I figure we go a little shorter today because we'll be back tomorrow to talk about the Louisiana Tech game.
Not really. I just, as long as they keep showing growth, I feel good about them. And as long as they don't mail it in late, like Indiana football did on Saturday, then I'll consider this a well-earned victory.
Well, I think Archie Miller's a much better coach than Tom Allen.
I was really I drove down there. I was there on Saturday, and we tailgated, and it was rainy and cold and miserable. And to be rewarded for driving down there and hanging out in the crappy weather, to be rewarded with an 8-minute drive to end the game that was 13 plays long and 12 of them were runs. I didn't understand. I don't understand coaches who say, you know what, that's enough today. We're gonna kind of turn it off. You see that in other sports, but you were down 4 scores. He refused to take the field goal, went for the touchdown. The field goal would have cut it to a 3-score game. I just don't understand that kind of mentality where you say, okay, enough's enough. We're going to pack it up and look forward to the bucket game.
Yeah, because nobody looks forward to a bucket game, do they? We've already got 6 wins, so there's no excitement. Well, we got 7, but maybe we're going to play in the
Music
Camilla
City
Bowl.
Bowl, I'm in. Like, if they go to a bowl, I'm happy, more or less, because, beggars can't be choosers. But I want them to go down to Nashville because I want to be able to drive down there and, have a nice couple of days and enjoy the company of some fellow Hoosiers.
I never thought of that before because that's not too far a drive. It's like 4 or 5 hours from me.
I think. 4 hours door to door from here. It's 168 miles south of Louisville, down 65, and you can do 168 miles in 2 hours.
So you're going to say you can do 168 miles an hour.
Boy, I'll tell you, that's my threshold's 110. I cannot go faster than 110. I feel like, oh boy, things are moving by me too quickly.
Yeah, your teeth start shaking, and
yeah, nobody needs that. I really start to get worried at about 110. So it's a good thing I don't go 110 very often.
We get the ESPN bowl projections. Let's see where they've got them right now. Because before they had him going out on the West Coast to play
right to Santa Clara
Arizona
again.
State or something. Yeah, I would just like a good matchup.
This past weekend, the CEO of the Music City Bowl was at Memorial Stadium looking at Indiana, and so go figure. Terrible weather, and the crowd didn't look, like much. But
right now,
what
the
are you going to
projection is Kentucky versus Pittsburgh or Kentucky versus Miami for the Music City Bowl. The Red Box Bowl in Santa Clara, Cal versus Indiana is what the projection is for both guys on ESPN.
Man, let's make it as inconvenient for Indiana fans as humanly possible, and expensive because going out there isn't cheap. San Francisco is that's an expensive town.
And let's face it, why would you go to San Francisco to watch the freaking Red Box Bowl? That is called the Red Fox Bowl. That would be even better.
I pity the fool. No, that's Mr.
That's not
T.
Red
That's
Fox.
not Red Fox.
Red Fox was the junk man with Lamont.
Oh,
hey,
boy.
if they do, we'll just call it the Red Fox Bowl, and we'll have the guy that played Lamont Sanford, Desmond Wilson, on the show.
He's still living. Poor Red. Red passed away. I don't know where LaWanda Page is, who played Aunt Esther.
Desmond Wilson, I've actually got his phone number. We could get him on the show.
Really?
Because he's a huge boxing fan, and he's been on a couple boxing shows we did a few years ago. But, yeah, he's a good guy, too.
Really? Good. Well, I hope he made a lot of money with Sanford & Son.
He probably still is. It's
because
on every day.
We haven't seen him since, I don't think. So
I don't know. I think he's been in stuff, but I don't watch much TV anymore. TV sucks anymore.
Well, ever since Sanford & Son went off.
Ever since Doogie Howser went off, it's been downhill. But all right, guys. Me and Kent will be back tomorrow at 2. Kent, you want to tell everybody where they can find you?
Yeah, it's all Kent Sterling all the time on Twitter, at Kent Sterling, Facebook, friend me at Kent Sterling, or follow me. Periscope, Kent Sterling. And then KentSterling.com. Of course, I wrote about Tom Allen today in Indiana football because I still had some residual issues with Saturday that I needed to resolve, and that's kind of my psychotherapy is just to write about stuff until I'm sick of being angry anymore.
All right. So go read makes Kent unsick quicker that way.
Yeah, I made that sound real attractive, didn't I?
Yeah, and then at some point, me and Cole will come on and talk Indiana football, and I'll try to make myself unsick. I did that last week because I trashed him for the whole half hour, and I think that Cole didn't know what to do. But I'm tired of, well, we've won 7 games already. What do you expect? Well, I expect more because that's just the way I am. But all right, guys, we're going to go ahead and we're going to wrap it up. I want to remind everybody you can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Kent Sterling, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.